In this video, in a very windy Netherlands, it's the head-to-head I've been dreaming of. It's SD1 versus 800. It's going to be fun times. So yeah, it's not often you get to try an SD1 against its successor, but here we are, two very different takes on the executive car, and two very different leaps for Rover as well. I'm pleased we've got two fastbacks. The SD1 of course was available only as a fastback, so we'll start by having a nose around this example. This is a Vanden Plas. It's the plush one, which means you get a bit of a spoilerage going on, but mostly it's about the velour inside, which we will get to. But David Bach's remarkable styling, still looking as fresh as ever, even next to an 800. They look like they're of different eras, but in a very good way. At the rear, things are perhaps a little more dated with the old ribbed rear lights, but yeah, as dramatic as ever. It's an astonishing shape when you consider this replaced the Rover P6. All the more remarkable when you consider that the P6 was the work of Sven King and David Bach. David Bach did the styling, Sven King did the engineering, and that was when they were just given free rein to do whatever was necessary. The SD1 then had to be developed under much more difficult circumstances, no budget at all, which is why it has conventional McPherson strut front suspension. It has a live rear axle, so a solid axle, no independent rear, of Oderar coil springs. It was very much a case of, you've got no money, you must develop this. So it'd be interesting to see how it drives. I have driven SD1s, but not for some time. On the other hand, by the time we got to the 1980s, Rover was in a very different state. It was what was left of British Leyland after all the other bits had been carved off and sold, and yeah, the need to replace the SD1 was growing. But again, you know, Rover were a bit tight on constraints, which led to a partnership with Honda, and the joint development of this car and the Honda Legend, the first of the Legend series, Honda's first executive car. It was perhaps not the greatest joint development because they ended up sharing very, very little, but nonetheless, under the bonnet is Honda's V6 engine. Unlike my own Rover 820 I owned earlier this year, this has full Honda power. This one has a 5-speed manual gearbox because this is the very desirable Vitesse. So I'm a bit giddy because this is the car I dreamed of when I was a child. Initially the 800 was saloon only, whereas the SD1 had been fastback only, but they did develop this very stylish fastback, and when you see the back ends next to each other, you can see how the styling team clearly took their inspiration from the older car, but it was entirely fresh and yeah, very much a novel take on the executive car, and designed by Roy Axe, who joined from Chrysler, so he'd done the Talbot Alpine. Perhaps you can see a bit of Alpine in those rear quarters as well. But yeah, again, a very strong, very bold, very low design, although it doesn't look as low as the dramatic SD1, which always looked a bit like a Ferrari, frankly. Let's do some interior comparisons. First of all, let's do a bit of a quality check. Well, it's a funk at least, but yeah, let's jump aboard this velour splendor. You can see the wood is not in great shape. The Vanden Plas was all about the wood, and sadly it wasn't really all about the wood enough. I don't think the Kingsbury finishers, Kingsbury being the home of Vanden Plas, would have been all that impressed with the wood from new. The dashboard is very, very of its time and very, very simple. The idea being that you could just simply move the pod over for left-hand drive, and you'll see you've got a glove box on both sides, which is a nod to the P6, which also had glove boxes on both sides. Huge steering wheel. I hadn't realised quite how big that is. The only one of these I've driven was a Vitesse, and it was a long time ago, and I think it had a sports wheel on it. There's a little aftermarket temperature gauge because as we'll discover, that one is not accurate, and nor is the fuel gauge. So, you know, electrical gremlins, kind of notorious, but 117,000 kilometers, that's pretty good for the time. And these unmarked switches are the window switches, drivers, passengers, and the rears. And there's the door handle hidden away down there. That's kind of a David Bach touch. He liked hiding door handles. Reasonable space down here in the footwell, and nice big brake pedal. And the stalks you would find in an Austin Metro or a Reliant Fox, indeed. Very glamorous. Coin holder, but we've got the full-blown computer on this one, nicely hidden by the gear lever. Not sure whether any of that works. We shall have a look. Turn the ignition on. Oh yeah, there we go, there's the time. So if I do average speed, 0.3, instant consumption is going to be pretty poor. Average, yeah, okay, most things seem to be 0. Maybe it doesn't work very well. Electronic time, no, I don't know what that one is. Is that since the trip start? Well, no, we haven't been driving for half an hour yet. So there we go, there is some information. We can change the balance of the speakers. A little cubby there. Is that a little glove box as well? That looks like somewhere that should hold cassettes, but I can't find a catch on it. Interesting. Maybe I won't pull too hard. And the handbrake does move between different sides. So turn the ignition off again. But yeah, and the plastics are not of the best quality. It reminds me quite a lot of my Daimler XJ40, where the plastics really did feel much older fashioned than the wood. There's a bit of headliner sag going on. That's all very, very classic. And you get these extra sections on the headrests, so the restraints really do become rests. But very nice comfy seats. They're not too shapely, but yeah, very comfortable. Let's see how the 800 compares. All right, let's give it a door test. Oh, that's quite a nice noise. That's very pleasant. And we'll jump aboard. The first thing we'll notice that I was entirely wrong. It's actually an automatic. I hadn't even realised the Vitesse came as an automatic. So that's a new one for me. But yeah, it's a bit of a step up, I would say. We've got leather, which again I wasn't expecting. I thought that was a sterling item and we'd have some sporty buckets or something in a Vitesse. We've got a lucky rabbit, so that's good. But yeah, now the dashboard is much more swooping. Compact little heater controls. Let's see how these feel, because the ones in mine were awful. Oh, that's still moving quite nicely, but you can still hear a bit of a creak. It's not quite the quality you hope for. We've got electric selection of the where you want it to come from. We can change the brightness of the dials, and the stalks are bespoke to these cars. They weren't used on other Rovers. Lights controlled here rather than a little paddle out of sight there, and a slightly more logical layout of electronic mirrors and windows. But again, very supportive seats, very comfortable, and a slightly saggy headliner. It's just like the SD1, but a complete difference in many ways. The pedals are actually offset slightly to the right. But again, a very spacious driving position, very comfortable, and very clear, if slightly unexciting, dials, which the camera isn't happy with because the sunlight coming in the other way. You see this one has done 128,000 kilometers, but it's otherwise very, very, very tidy indeed. And it's actually two colors, it would seem. It looks like it's been repainted gunmetal over silver. So we've got slightly different paint in the door shuts, but yeah, the plastic seems slightly better quality, and the wood too is yeah, slightly less prone to cracking. You can get dashboard lift, that's quite famous, where this starts lifting off, so we better not leave it parked in the sunlight too long. Right, let's compare the rear seats. Sitting in the back of the SD1, you wouldn't normally have the headliner touching your head, but it is actually fairly spacious. The only slight issue I'm having with the seat set for me is that my ankles are actually rubbing on the bottom of the seat, but we've got map reading pockets there. So it's not overly spacious, but considering how low the car is overall, it's really not too bad. Nice comfy centre armrest, and yeah, definitely worse places to sit. And yeah, I'd say this is all right, but how does the 800 compare? Now in the back of the 800, it feels more spacious. There seems to be a bit more leg room. My ankles aren't catching the bottom of the seat. There seems to be more headroom as well, and not just because the headliner isn't sagging. The whole thing feels more upright. The windows feel deeper. It feels more spacious. We've got an electric window switch there. We've got a little, oh, there's a cigarette lighter in the back even. How posh. And again, we've got the centre armrest. 60-40 split I think on the rear seat as well, so a bit more practicality perhaps, but yeah, overall it feels lighter, more airy in the back of the 800, even though we've got the sunroof blind closed. So yeah, I think the Rover's winning from the rear seat point of view, although you don't get the electric bench of a Sterling. That's where you could adjust each side separately. Yeah, this isn't quite the top model. So the boot is a good size on the SD1. The only problem is this very high lip, so you've got to kind of lift everything over it to get in there, and no nooks and crannies for hiding your shopping really, and that's good. It has got panels, but they can't open up because things get in the way. Yeah, that's not the best bit of design ever, is it? Because that means I can't do it one-handed. First annoyance with the 800 is you either open it with a key or with the release down here, one of which is fuel, one of which is boot. Take your chances. Have a one. And we very carefully lift. Oh, that's quite heavy. And then the struts kick in and up we go. And as you can see, it makes a huge difference having this cutout, so you haven't got to lift stuff quite so high. Oh, that's actually velcroed in. Okay, so now we can lift up and see where the wheel is underneath. Oh, we could if it wasn't full of mats and everything, but the release is here to fold the rear seat, which is quite a nice touch. It means it's nice and secure because it's locked in the boot. I'm gonna have to try this. Oh yes, it does work. There we go. Under the bonnet, the two couldn't be more different really. Obviously we've got a longitudinal V8 here, the famous Rover V8 engine, here producing about 155 brake horsepower with its twin carburettors. This isn't the later EFI version, this is a very early Series 2. Very clean engine bay, and not a bad engine to work on. You can kind of see where the spark plugs are, so servicing not too bad. Attached to a Borg-Warner 3-speed auto gearbox in this example. Yeah, that's quite the difference. For a start, the bonnet opens the opposite way, so you actually have better access for working on the engine. And secondly, we've got a transverse V6 engine, which looks very different. Looks very Japanese, perhaps unsurprisingly. But we've got electronic fuel injection, and yeah, not too bad to work on for a transverse V6. Look, you can get those plugs there and those plugs down the back. A lot easier than on a Rover 45 V6, it must be said, which had Rover's own V6 engine. But anti-lock braking, and yeah, a lot more complexity, but actually slightly more power from a smaller engine, 2.7 versus 3.5. Okay, rear wiper tests, here we go. There we go. No wash, but that's the white pattern. And you notice it's got an underslung blade on the arm. So you've got these pin attachments, also used on the Rover, on the Austin Ambassador. And on the Rover 800, oh look at that. But you know, it leaves an awful lot of screen unwiped, so I'm going to hand victory to the SD1 on the rear wiper battle. Right, so here we are. We're going to start with the SD1 because why wouldn't you? Fires very smoothly into life. We shall apply the seatbelt for legality reasons, and we shall rumble away, and we'll test the 800 when we get back. Now we've got the alternator light on at the moment, but that will go away, I'm assured, once we get some revs on. Keep an eye out for cyclists and white vans. And there we go, we're in top gear already. These Borg-Warner gearboxes, they don't want to faff about with holding the revs. They're not interested. I think this is the Borg-Warner 65, which is slightly different to the gearbox I had in my Rover P6. That was the earlier 35. And yeah, it was just a gearbox that always wanted to be in top. But, you know, I'm not touching any pedal, and we're there pottering along at the legal speed limit at the moment. But what strikes me initially is how enormous this steering wheel is, and a bit strange really. You don't need a steering wheel that big in a car with power steering, but nonetheless it's what we have, so we shall make the most of it. The brakes are nice and reassuring. I think disc drum, if I remember rightly, compared to the all discs of a P6. So in many ways the SD1 was a massive retrograde step over the P6. Oh, actually I might go this way, because I think we want to try and find our way to some better roads. Yeah, the one thing that's lacking is an ambience of quality with these cars. The P6 had it because there was just an abundance of leather, really. Do we think that means this way is the fun way? So it looks a little more open. There we go, and we shall go this way. As we continue to just make it up as we go along. So you can ride the effortless wall of torque of that big, lusty V8 engine. It's not an insanely brisk car. 155 brake horsepower in quite a big old lump of motor car is not the most, but needless to say it makes the right noises and makes good progress. The one issue is, being only a 3-speed gearbox, it's rather short of legs, so on the motorway it ends up feeling rather desperately short of gearing, and you're waiting for it to change again, and it won't, because it has run out of gears. I am driving this example quite carefully because I think the owner is quite precious about it, and I don't want to hammer it. Some cars I'm allowed to hammer, and my own especially, but sometimes you have to have a bit more respect for someone else's car. But I don't think that's the problem. This is the Vanden Plas. This is meant to be a plush wafting barge, and while the luxury may be a little in short supply, it still manages to feel prestigious. I mean, the engine helps, obviously, because it makes all the right noises. The steering is a little lifeless. It's very light, but yeah, it doesn't necessarily tell you what's going on all that well. Tesla Model 3 there. There's a different sort of car. Yeah, with that burble, it always sounds nice even when you're not moving, although not quite as nice. Look at that, I don't even know what that is. I know what that is. Yeah, that makes rather more of its V8 soundtrack than this car does. She'll knock her in neutral. Oh no. Time to do that, we're going. Yeah, you'll notice the fuel gauge is saying nothing useful at all, while the temperature gauge will go off into scary places. But it's okay, we've got a second temperature gauge down here, which I shall pay more attention to. So while the performance is not remarkable, yeah, it's plenty enough, especially here in the Netherlands, where you're not really allowed to go quickly at any point at all. That's just not how they do things here. Even on the motorways, I think, oh no, I think there are some sections you can get up as high as 110, maybe 130 in places. Oh, but not many. Of course, I've got a rear wiper to play with, I've got front wipers. In fact, while we're waiting, oh, there we go. Oh no, oh no. A, we've got squeaking going on. B, very small triangle of doom. Nice micro K10 there. So yeah, that's slightly disappointing. I'm trying to find where the minor switch gear is to know how you operate the rear wiper. We've got dashboard illumination control there, a headlamp switch down there. Oh, I see, it's on there. Right. At some point we'll do rear wiper. There you go, you can just about keep up with a Renault Clio. So we're up to 50 now and it's already doing 2,000 revs. And there are no more gears, so that is probably the biggest downside of this car. But considering the reputation these cars had for build quality, you know, with people like Clarkson having doors falling off on Top Gear, because yeah, that obviously really happens. There are no creaks or rattles in here, and it feels quite refined, really. The ride, despite the limitations placed upon spanking, the ride is really rather good, and the handling too. It feels much more measured, much more controlled than, say, a Rover P6. You know, P6s do lean rather a lot, and while the P6 does handle extremely well, it doesn't necessarily feel very comfortable for the occupants, whereas this car is necessarily firmer, but the handling is more measured, and it feels more in control, even if ultimately it's not quite as advanced as the old P6 in terms of engineering. So it just goes to show that engineering isn't always everything. I mean, Spanking was very, very, very good at engineering. Look how well he made the Range Rover ride and handle. And ultimately, that's riding on beam axles. That's 1930s technology. TR7 was another example of just what he could do with so very little. So yeah, I mean, the good manners of the SD1 ultimately allowed it to do really well in European touring cars. I think the British touring cars as well, until they outlawed big V8 engines as an unfair advantage, which was silly because they were a very nice sounding advantage. Unfortunately, the Netherlands isn't really the country to come to test the handling on sporty roads, but yeah, that's the Netherlands for you. Yeah, that's always sounding lovely at slightly naughty speeds, but I'm sure the speedometer isn't entirely accurate, officer. So it's quite nicely geared. It's just that you don't get any sensation really. I've got no idea what the front wheels are doing at all. But very composed over speed humps, which is important in the Netherlands. The drempels are everywhere, the dreaded drempels. Yeah, in terms of driving experience, it's really rather pleasant. You know, it's like so many things. The British are very good at certain aspects of a car. That's showing you how little I'm having to turn to get round that sort of a bend. It's just that ultimately the final build tend to be the issue, but by the time they got into the Series 2 SD1s, they had ironed out so many of the issues. There were all sorts of problems with the SD1 initially. Paint was falling off them, the build quality was terrible. So bad they moved production from Solihull to Canley. Not Canley, Cowley, sorry. Canley's in Coventry, Cowley is in Oxfordshire. So the workers stopped making Austin Maxes and started making these instead. So just let the speed come down a bit as if we're stuck behind someone, and then a bit of kick down. No, it doesn't kick down, it just uses the torque. Away we go. Check the old blind spot. The mirrors aren't superb, to be honest. Did a window up, and yeah, there's a bit of wind noise, which is perhaps not acceptable. The worst problem is the reflection of the dashboard in the windscreen is pretty frightening, to be honest. Yeah, maybe black dash tops would be better than beige, because that's a real struggle to see where I'm going. And you can see where it's all crinkling up a bit as well. So the build quality is just not really there. But that's enough of the SD1 with its comical gear lever. Let's go and see how the Rover 800 compares. We shall see how the Rover 800 compares. Yeah, not so much a burble, just oh, maybe there's a bit of a burble about it, but it's certainly creamy and smooth. And of course these have the 2.7 litre version. The Rover 800 originally had a 2.5, but people complained about it and said it wasn't punchy enough. So lift the button on the back, into D we go, and we shall drive the same route if I can remember. I've been warned the indicators don't self-cancel, which is perfect. It isn't quite as eager on the release as the SD1. The SD1 was flying away. So yeah, there's a very gentle creep. So I'm actually going to have to accelerate. The steering wheel feels tiny now. This feels like a tiny little button. And sadly, I must say, I mean, you can hear some trim rattles and creaks. That is very much the world of the Rover 800. So even though the plastics may look like they're of better quality, the truth doesn't necessarily reflect that. I'm going to have to open the window. It is on the warm side. We've got a computer here as well. I forgot to point that out. Average consumption 29, I think that says. It's a credit to the owner. We shall go right here. Again, the steering is very light and a bit lifeless. A bit more powered on the well, not powered, but the self-centering is a bit stronger here. Look at this, you get some amazing pedal powered craft here in the Netherlands. That's looking hard work even on the flat. It's not an unpleasant noise, is it? It's just different. None of that menacing burble. The sheer wastage of a twin carb V8 engine. Yeah, the steering is still far too light. It's almost as if they based it on a heavier car. Maybe the diesel's got nicely weighted steering. But as when sitting in the back, it feels lighter and more airy, more spacious, even though I don't think it really is. It just, because the waistline sits a little lower, yeah, it does feel more spacious. Yeah, it's a very strange sensation. The ride isn't quite as composed over the Drempels, I don't think. Or maybe it's not quite so soft. It is still composed. It's well damped. It's just, yeah, it hasn't quite got the flow to the SD1. I think both cars represent their decades, really. By the 1980s, the smoother forms were very much the thing, and the SD1 interior was starting to look very dated. I'm not sure this interior is dated quite so much, or maybe it's just because I am a child of the 80s. I mean, certainly the indicator stalks feel a bit more quality, because they are. Yeah, it just hasn't quite got that iconic lazy burble, has it? And the gearbox is quite funky. It's, as in a TH, it does go funk into gear a bit. Which is surprising, because Japanese tend to be very good at an auto gearbox, but it is Honda's own unit. And yeah, Honda gearboxes, their automatics aren't always the best. I remember driving a Honda NSX with an automatic gearbox. That was possibly the most disappointing experience of my life. Certainly smooth and peaceful and calm and relaxing. And the trim rattles have gone away a bit now, I note. No amber, because we're in the Netherlands. Whoa, there we go. Suddenly she's woken up. That wasn't full throttle, honest Mark. Wow, that was astonishing pickup. Yeah, the SD1 doesn't do that. And the noise as you build the revs up, I mean, I know because I have driven one of these very hard. Yeah, it's a gorgeous, beguiling noise. As an SD1 will as well, to be fair. Those Rover V8s, when you get them screaming, sound absolutely astonishing. And these are engines I do love to hear sing. It's just that I'm under instructions not to go too crazy with it today. And to be fair, it's hard to go too crazy with any car in the Netherlands. Like the SD1, it wasn't the best example of an executive car at the time, but it's still lovely. I mean, I remember travelling in mine which had only the basic 4-cylinder engine. It was surprisingly relaxing. But like the SD1, there were constraints on the design team, and I think overall the results are very impressive. I think these cars are a lot better than people give them credit for. I mean, considering this has double wishbone suspension all round, of fairly limited travel, because the Japanese, that was their idea, especially Honda, were more about handling than ride. I think they managed to get a remarkably composed ride out of these. Let's see if you check it around a bit. Oh yeah, it doesn't wobble quite as much as mine. I thought mine probably needed new rear dampers, and I think this probably confirms it. We shall test it on the next roundabout just to be sure. All disc stoppers on these. Fun fact, these cars have the same rear calipers as an MGF, because the MGF is perhaps the ultimate parts bin car. It has to be said that the V6 engine does make this car. Mine was surprisingly capable with the O Series 4-cylinder engine, but this is really the engine you want. Yeah, that's really not bad. But now we must get down to the nitty-gritty and the dream scenario. If you were able to choose between SD1 and 800, which would you choose? I suppose one thing we haven't done is wipers. I'm trying to remember how you wash. Is it that one, or is that just a wash? No, there we go. No triangle of doom, and then the wipers should park off the screen like so. And did they work? Oh yeah. On mine they didn't work very often, which was slightly annoying. Yeah, I think auto is the way to go. So I mean, the best thing about an auto is you can that's a lot of gear changes it's packing in there. That's quite hilarious, because we've not only got a 4-speed gearbox, we've got a torque converter lockup as well, so that means it's as efficient as a manual gearbox at these cruising speeds. Yeah, these later automatic gearboxes are just a world away from those clunky old Borg Warners. So there we go, that was quite the head-to-head. Rover 800 versus SD1. Now, in the traditional head-to-head, you'd make a decision. I really don't think I could. If someone said you can take one of these cars now, which one would I pick? It very much kind of depends what you want to use them for. As a daily transport, I would go 800 absolutely every day, I think. It's just got a bit more economy, a bit more refinement. I would trust the Honda engineering to work on a more regular basis. But if you just want a car for driving to shows and enjoying on high days and holidays, well, either one is something special. There's more of a classic experience in the SD1, the noises the transmission makes, and twin carburettors, the burble. But yeah, in terms of driving dynamic, they're both quite different, but also fairly similar. I was quite surprised by that. I was expecting the cars to feel a bit more different to drive, but they're both very appealing in very similar ways. So I'm going to wimp out entirely and be like Mark, who owns both these cars. So that's the perfect answer. If you can't decide between these two, buy both of them. Neither car are particularly expensive. SD1 prices are starting to go up. 800s are still ridiculously cheap. I'm astonished that videos on them get so many views, because it doesn't seem anyone wants to actually own one. But yeah, wrongly so. Great cars, very underrated, and that goes for the SD1 as well. So yeah, there's my overall conclusion. Buy two cars, because two cars are always better than one. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. Let me know your own conclusions in the comments below, and I look forward to seeing you in a future video. Farewell.